The flute of champagne slid from my father's fingers and shattered on marble the second the news anchor said my name, and in that brittle, ringing silence, I realized it was the first time in years he had truly seen me. My name is Mara Quinn, I'm 29, and until that weekend, my father introduced me to his world with a careful smile and four small words that tasted like rust. She's a security guard, not a veteran, not a threat analyst. Not the woman trusted to protect diplomats and CEOs. A guard, as if I spent my life shooing teenagers from a mall fountain. He valued polished pedigrees, not people who ran toward the fire. He measured love in corner offices and club memberships, not the quiet dignity of doing your job under pressure. And yet, on the day he married his third wife beneath chandeliers as bright as noon, what I did for a living became the difference between a headline and a eulogy. My father built himself into a monument. Graham Quinn, managing partner at Blackstone and Finch, buyer of rare wines and memberships, collector of art, and the sort of friends who send holiday cards from villas with names. When I was 12 and my parents split, his world became penthouse weekends with a view and monologues about futures shaped like his. My mother, Nina, taught kindergarten in a sunlit classroom and came home smelling of washable markers and cinnamon tea. With her, success meant helping the small people become brave. With him, success meant turning your last name into a logo. I learned early how to sit through a glossy life without becoming a reflection in the glass. He had a plan for me. Prestigious college, law school, summers interning in glass towers, a tidy life he could narrate to clients between courses. I gave him the plan folded into a paper airplane and watched it sail out the window the day I enlisted. Enlisted, he said at a dinner I barely ate. From our background, Mara, we commission. We lead. I smiled and told him leaders don't come with a single origin story. For years in the Army taught me what the classroom doesn't, that fear arrives in waves and you can learn to surf or you can drown, that your voice can steady other people's hands, that you are who you are when the plan disappears. I finished my service, took my GI Bill, and earned a criminal justice degree while working nights, learning the grammar of cameras and radios, doors and blind corners, the choreography of keeping people whole. By 29, I was a senior operative at Sentinel and North, the firm people call when private security needs to mean something. I have led protection details for a diplomatic summit that came with more languages than we had earpieces, overseen security for a tech expo that drew protesters and pickpockets, and built threat assessments that read like weather forecasts for trouble. My supervisor nominated me for an award that came with an acrylic plaque and a handshake. My father glanced at the photo I texted and sent a thumbs up. If a job didn't come with cufflinks, he didn't know how to measure it. When the invitation to his wedding arrived on thick cream stock with navy script and a seal pressed deep into the paper, I turned it over 3 times before calling my friend Jade. Marina Claire Resort, I read. 40 acres of seafront, a ballroom called the Lantern Hall, string quartet for cocktail hour. You're going, Jade said, in the tone of a woman who refuses to let you hide. You'll wear something that makes you feel like the main character, and you'll sit up straight, and you won't let him shrink you. She took me shopping and made me try on a navy dress that held its own under chandeliers and in daylight, the kind that said I know who I am without yelling about it. I packed light. Dress. Flats for the walk back to my room. One suit, just in case. A stubborn little hope I didn't have the energy to unpack. His fiancée now wife was Vivian Morrow, a philanthropic queen with a calendar full of galas and a last name that moved in certain circles like a skeleton key. The society pages had noted their engagement with adjectives like elegant and well-matched. I knew Vivian only well enough to recognize the expensive ease with which she greeted rooms. The resort was an hour from the city, all clipped hedges and sun-struck water. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and polished floors. The guest list looked like a donor wall had learned to walk. Linen dresses, loafers with no socks, laughter pitched just right for people who enjoy hearing themselves. My father crossed the marble toward me in a suit the color of storms, Vivian on his arm in a silk dress the color of champagne. Mara, he said, leaning in for an air kiss that didn't land. I'm glad you could make it. Vivian's smile touched my cheekbones and nothing else. Do enjoy the grounds, she said lightly, already waving to someone more photogenic. The rehearsal dinner looked like money acted out. A private room over the water, round tables, orchids leaning in crystal vases, napkins folded like origami swans. Place cards in calligraphy. Mine put me near a pillar, 2 tables away from where the toasts would happen, close enough to clap and too far to count. My father brought couples by as if he were guiding them through a small museum. My daughter, Mara, he said, in the tone people use to note a familiar painting. She's a security guard. Sometimes he added, she took a different path, a small shrug that turned into a sentence. We did what we could. Ingenious. That delivery pride and apology pressed together until they were indistinguishable. Blackstone's second floor is full of your father's ments. One woman purred to me like a warning. Sure you won't consider the bar exam? Her husband asked whether I ever got bored, walking around with a flashlight. I excused myself to the hallway and texted Jade. He's introduced me as a guard 7 times. Jade wrote back, you are a wall between danger and people who never learned how to see it coming. You are a storm gate. You don't need their weather reports. I put my phone away and went back in. The event photographer slid into the chair next to mine while adjusting his lens. How's your table? He asked dryly. I've met 4 men named after their fathers, I said. He grinned. I heard his intro. For the record, I'd rather be trapped in a room with a professional who can keep me alive than another hedge fund. I nearly thanked him with tears. We ate food that tasted like restraint. We stood for toasts made of inherited charm. I returned to my room and lay awake listening to the air conditioner click on and off, replaying each introduction until my stomach knotted. Tomorrow, I told the dark. You can endure tomorrow. Morning came bright and smug. Weddings scheduled themselves like air traffic, hair and makeup in one wing, boutonnieres pinned with surgical focus, ushers rehearsing the way a wave of guests moves like a tide. I put on running shoes and followed the resort's path down the bluff, letting the sea air clear everything my father had put back in my throat. At lunch, I ate alone on the balcony with the gulls for company. At 3, I zipped my navy dress and stood in front of the mirror, willing myself into the kind of woman Jade had told me to play. The garden was laid out like a magazine, rows of white chairs, ribbons lifting gently, an arch of flowers like clouds had fallen and decided to stay. I found a seat in the back row where it would be easy to leave if leaving became the most adult thing I could do. Security is 90% boredom, 10% math, all of it being alive to patterns. What doesn't fit? What repeats? The catering staff were a choreography of identical shirts and vests, polished shoes, practiced paths. One moved wrong. His vest hung like he borrowed it. His eyeline cut through people instead of sliding across them. He wasn't scanning for champagne flutes. He was mapping. Once you see it, you can't not see it. He brushed past the service bar, and 2 others peeled off to fall in near him like magnets remember each other. If the hair on your arms ever stands up without a breeze, trust it. I watched him slip through a door marked staff only and followed at a civilian's pace, not a guard's, not that word that had been sandpaper in my ears all night. The service corridor hummed with quiet work pans, radios, the low music of people keeping the visible world invisible. I lingered at a map of the resort mounted under plexiglass until he emerged from a storeroom with the other 2. They spoke in their throats, but the words rose like nails on water. East Gate. For more inbound. Toast window. No phones. One had an earpiece that wasn't the resort's brand. Another adjusted his cuff, and the barrel at his hip made the movement awkward. My pulse ticked twice fast, then slowed into the steady metronome of training. I didn't call my father. I called the police. I introduced myself and my credentials and outlined what I'd observed, emphasized that this was not cold feet or a bad feeling, but a cluster of indicators. The dispatcher's voice got crisp and careful. Patrol units dispatched. ETA 20 minutes. I thanked her, ended the call, and went hunting for the resort's security office. Every venue hides the spine of its vigilance somewhere unglamorous. At the Marina Claire, it lived behind a beige door with a keycard reader down a hall that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. A guard named Owen watched a wall of screens with the weary patience of a man who knows how few guests will ever say thank you. I need your supervisor, I said, laying my Sentinel and North badge on the console like a passport. Now, head of security was a man named Jenkins with a pen tucked behind his ear, the chosen accessory of people who solve problems by writing lists. I gave him what I had: descriptions, movements, language, timing. We can't call off a ceremony because a guest thinks she heard somebody say East Gate, he said, not unkindly, the practical worry of a man whose job comes with a chorus line of very important people. You shouldn't, I agreed. You should post your people at exits and sight lines and make sure your gift table guards are more than decoration. And you should know uninvited police are 12 minutes out. They've likely hit other events. They'll use the toast to cut the room's attention in half. He stared at me for one long heartbeat, then spoke into his radio, and the building shifted in tiny ways. I felt in my Bonesay door propped open on a latch, a guard who had been standing now walking, a set of eyes redirected. I returned to the garden. Music unfurled. Vivian came down the aisle like an advert for Grace, white silk obeying her. My father's face softened into something I used to wish he would aim at me. I scanned the edges and the sky. 2 men in catering kits stationed themselves near the gift table with too much stillness. Another positioned himself by the temporary bar where the servers were lining champagne flutes like soldiers. Someone dimmed the lights too early for atmosphere, perfectly on time for misdirection. A signal rolled through the imposters like a ripple through tall grass. I texted Jenkins, 3 by gifts, 1 by bar, 1 at East Gate, exterior side. Primary with earpiece short sleeve, dark hair, scar left jaw. He replied with a single checkmark. The officiant pronounced them married. Applause lifted and split the air. Servers threaded trays into the aisle, flute stems chiming against silver. The man by the bar reached inside his jacket with the economy of someone who has practiced. My voice cut across violin and congratulations before my mind could argue with it. Gun. I shouted, and that word, that one terrible, necessary word, pulled the floor out from under the afternoon. Screaming and the metallic music of chairs tipping onto stone. The man fired 1 shot straight into the sky. Birds exploded from the hedges. Nobody move, he commanded, and there it was, the cruelty of theater when it grabs a real weapon. 2 of his partners drew pistols. The others began their work with canvas sacks and harsh voices, sweeping down aisles, demanding watches and necklaces, opening clasped hands with the threat of force. My father pulled Vivian to him, and her diamonds flashed panic. The leader moved to them like a man who knew what wealth looks like up close. Behind an overturned chair, an elderly woman's face folded in on itself and her breath stuttered toward the edge of black. One of the crew pivoted his weapon toward the sound. Shut her up, he snapped at her husband, who held her hand as if small touch could be a shield. She needs her meds, the old man said, voice breaking in 2. I stood before I told myself not to. My training has hardwired me to step between. I'm a medic, I lied without flinching. Let me help her. You don't want a fatality to turn a robbery into something that keeps you in a cell forever. The gunman hesitated, greed briefly learning a new word, risk. He flicked his barrel at me, fast. I moved to the woman and counted her breaths, my body a wall between her and the muzzle. In through your nose, I murmured to her. Out like it's a birthday wish. You're okay. My eyes stayed everywhere. The leader stood in front of my father, and I watched him reach for my father's watch, saw the moment his gaze snagged on Vivian's necklace like a magpie noticing a coin. The safe in the suite, he said to my father. Code, my father's voice came out a note higher than its usual register. I don't know it. Vivian's assistant dashed, no phones, the man said, and pressed the gun to my father's temple with a casualness that made bile rise in my throat. I could have screamed. I could have lunged. I could have prayed. Instead, I lifted my head without standing and said, clear and even, Master Access list at the reception desk. I can get you the code. I work here, he twisted, eyes snapping to me. Doing what? Security. I rose smoothly. palms visible, and held his attention with my body and my voice the way you hold a dog on the brink of a bad decision. And if you shoot anyone, you'll be scraping the rest of your life off a prison floor. You want the jewelry and the cash and to get out. Let me help you keep the smaller charge. He came close, close enough that I smelled metal and something like mint. That was the space where training lives, the breath between a thought and an act. I grabbed his wrist with my left hand, snapped my right to the gun, and peeled his fingers away from the trigger while turning my hip into a center of gravity. His hand spasmed. The gun came free. I pivoted, swung my forearm across his sternum, drove him down onto the stone, and put his own weight between my body and the rounds I knew were coming. A shot rang and fire tore a line across my upper arm hot and fast, a kiss from a bullet that didn't get what it wanted. The world sharpened. No, I yelled, and the resort's plainclothes guards who had been shadows became men, and 2 police officers who had slipped into the perimeter while the world had its attention elsewhere revealed themselves like magicians who deal in consequence, and the room filled with purpose. One of the crew grabbed a server and dragged her toward the service corridor with the muzzle of his gun pressed into the soft at her jaw. Back off, he shouted, and fear spiked again, a new wave in the room. I shoved the leader at a cop who grabbed him like relief and sprinted after the hostage taker, the heat of my arm a second heartbeat. The corridor smelled like garlic and floor wax. The man had the woman at the edge of the loading dock, the sea visible beyond like an audience. "You're done," I said, keeping my voice level, letting him hear how uninteresting heroics can sound when they're happening. There are cops at every door. Put the gun down and let her go, and you get to meet a lawyer before a judge. Otherwise, this ends with a paramedic doing paperwork. He shifted his grip, eyes cutting past me to gauge odds. I stepped left, drawing him with me, forcing him to turn, to change stance, to lose the angle. "Please," the server whispered, and the words snagged something in him. The muzzle dipped an inch. I closed the distance in 2 steps, knocked his wrist hard enough to elect the weapon from his hand, heel-kicked it across concrete, and brought my forearm down across his forearm in a controlled bar that put him on his knees without breaking. Anything I didn't intend to. He tried to bring his head back into my face and caught my shoulder instead. I finished the hold, cuffed him with a zip tie an officer tossed to me, and handed him off, the adrenaline roaring in my ears like surf. Back in the ballroom, the world had started to put itself in order. Police moved through the room with calm efficiency. Guests sobbed or laughed, or did both at once. Paramedics wrapped my arm and scolded me gently for being stubborn about letting them check my pulse. "It's a graze," I said, because no one wants to be dramatic when other people have been terrified. Across the room, my father stood with Vivian, his face clean of polish, sudden with age, listening to a detective. When he turned and saw me, he moved as if something had cut a string. "Mara," he said, voice raw, eyes tracking the blood on my sleeve. "You're hurt." "It looks worse than it is," I said, which was only slightly untrue. "Are you okay?" He nodded like he was learning how. A guest near the front said loudly, "That's her Graham's daughter, the one who took him down," and the look that crossed my father's face then held so many things it would take me months to name them. Statements, questions, the throb that comes when adrenaline leaves and pain realizes you're alone. News vans with antennae that rose like curious insects at the gate. The reception ended before it started. The evidence bags clinked with jewelry surrendered under threat that now would be returned under relief. I avoided cameras and went up to my room while the sky turned that impossible blue that makes you feel undeserving. My phone buzzed until it felt like a trapped pea. Jade sent 8 texts with a mix of profanity and pride. My boss, Keenan, left 2 voicemails in which he said my name like a mantra and asked if I was all right and also whether I understood what this would mean for the firm's phones on Monday. My mother left a message that was mostly breath and the words "I love you" threaded through it. Morning broke with my name in a banner. Security expert foils armed heist at resort wedding. 7 arrested. The footage they'd aired came from cameras I could map blindfolded, me disarming the leader, me moving toward the kitchen, a frame where for an instant I looked like someone out of a film before I turned back into an exhausted human. The police captain in a briefing said words like commendation and prevented tragedy. Guests looked into the camera with tearful gratitude and called me a hero because it's easier to say that than to try to explain that sometimes the world is saved by exactly the woman you told a room full of people to underestimate. Brunch moved to a smaller room because crime scenes do not release themselves quickly, because nothing is more stubborn than the residue of violence. People who had made a point of avoiding me now sought me out with eyes that glittered with curiosity and relief. Vivian approached first, elegance softened by something like reality. "Mara," she said, and for the first time my name in her mouth sounded like a name and not an accessory. "How is your arm?" "Recovering," I said, because I was. "The detectives want another few details, and then I'll get out of your celebration." "Please don't leave yet," she said quickly. Graham Dash, she looked over her shoulder. "He wants to talk." I found coffee I didn't drink and stood near the door. On a television mounted above the bar, my headshot from the firm's website appeared like a ghost of the version of me my father didn't know. The anchor's voice smoothed out the story and laid it gently in the room. They cut to Keenan in front of Sentinel and North Sign. "MS. Quinn leads by example," he said, with a pride I'd heard in his voice on late nights after successful details. "She's trained to mitigate risk, not seek out glory. Yesterday, she did what professionals do. She acted before fear decided for her," someone at a table said. "Holy look," and a dozen heads lifted toward the screen. Across the room, my father's hand spasmed. His champagne flute slid and exploded at his shoes a second time, the crack silencing 3 conversations at once. Applause rose when the segment ended, not choreographed, not polite. A few people stood, and then everyone followed, because humans like to be on the right side of the moment. My father did not clap. He walked toward me through the small sea of people as if the floor had tipped. "Mara," he said when he reached me, and there were 50 sentences behind my name asking to be spoken. "They'd like you for interviews," a staff member said at my elbow, small and apologetic. The manager asked Dash. "No," I said, softly, but in a way that made a full stop. "Not today." My father's mouth opened and closed once. Can we Dash?" He stumbled, and if you have never seen a proud man's pride unbutton itself, you don't know how quiet it makes a room. I nodded toward a small alcove where a painting of a ship watched over 2 chairs meant for whispers. We sat. He stared at my bandage as if it were a paragraph he needed translated. "I always wanted to keep you safe," he said, and the irony of the universe reclined on a chaise longue and laughed. "You introduced me as a cautionary tale," I replied without heat. "A different path you can narrate like a regrettable subplot. You never asked what my work is. You never wanted to know. Last night you told 3 men I was a guard and a disappointment with the same breath." He flinched. "I didn't understand." "You didn't try. I let silence do a little work. Did you think less of me because I put on a uniform? Or because the people I stand beside on bad days don't make lists you can read to your golf partners?" He stared at his hands. "I thought you were wasting your potential. I thought you were angry at me for wanting more." "I wanted different," I said. "Different is not smaller. It's just not yours." Above his shoulder, the TV cut back to the footage of me in the corridor. People in the room watched us watch me, the double exposure of a life in progress. "I saw you," he said finally, with the halting wonder of someone describing a dream they only half believed. "I saw what you did. I saw the room change when you stood up. I saw your mother in your face." The last sentence threaded through everything else and eased it a little. "She called me," he added, shame and relief sharing a chair. "She reminded me of all the ceremonies I missed while I was congratulating myself on being practical. She told me to apologize to you before you have to save my life a second time." Despite myself, I laughed, because my mother tells the truth like a well-thrown stone. A staffer turned the television up again. A new anchor spoke about a commendation the city would present to a local security expert whose actions likely prevented mass casualties. The room applauded again, a smaller wave this time, and then people turned back to their plates and their mimosas and the stories they would tell at dinners for months. I stood. "I'm leaving," I said. "I have to give a statement downtown this afternoon. I don't want to be here to answer questions for people who didn't know my name yesterday." My father nodded, throat working. "Can we meet later? Before you go?" Without an audience. I found enough of the 12-year-old inside me left to say yes. He chose a quiet bar on the top floor where the ocean made even small thoughts feel larger. 2 drinks sat sweating on the table when I arrived. "Club soda with lime," he said, pushing one toward me. "You don't drink on duty, and I can't quite tell if you think you're still on." The unexpected care in that observation chipped something off the wall. We sat in the kind of silence that comes with big recalibrations. I listened to a consultant break down the footage. He said at last. He spoke in this cool way about footwork and leverage and vectors, and I thought, that's my daughter he's graphing like a theorem. I don't know you the way a father should. That's on me. I was waiting for you to become someone I could brag about instead of learning the language of who you already were. People paid you a lot of money to be convincing, I said. You convinced yourself. He nodded and didn't look away. You were brave yesterday. I was trained yesterday, I corrected. I don't want a statue. I want you to stop writing the story of my life without reading it. He exhaled, a long surrender. I owe you an apology for years of belittling something I didn't understand. I can undo it. I can only ask for a chance to do better, if you want that. He looked like a man afraid to reach for a second chance, because the first one he held so tightly he broke it. I'm not a ribbon you get to pin on your lapel, I said. But I'm your daughter, and I'm not going anywhere. If you want to do the work, do it. It looks like questions and listening and not introducing me like a footnote. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it wasn't also almost a sob. Your mother said your terms would be clear. The weeks after turned me into a person other people wanted to interview. I declined almost all of it. Keenan called me into a conference room with glass walls and told me Sentinel and North would like me to build out a new unit dedicated to event risk, training venues and planners to recognize what I had recognized and to act on it. The promotion came with a pay bump, a corner I didn't need, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was going to make a map other people could follow when their hands started to shake. The city council handed me a certificate in a ceremony with tepid coffee and a banner that refused to hang straight. The police chief pressed a medal into my palm, its weight less than a good night's sleep, but not nothing. My mother cried and clapped and hugged me so hard the ribbon wrinkled. My father came and sat in the second row and did not clap at the wrong times. He took a photo of the 3 of us that did not look like a statement, but like a moment. We built a different kind of relationship slowly, because slow is the only speed that kindness makes sense at after years of criticism. He asked questions about my team. I took him to a training afternoon where he watched a room learn how to move people out of a space without sending panic skittering like mice. He tried the moves and bruised his forearm and laughed at himself. When a magazine that writes lists for important people under 40 included me, he framed the page and put it in his office between a print of a ship and a photo of him shaking hands with a mayor. It looked less ridiculous there than I expected. The scar on my arm paled and itched on rainy days. Sometimes I catch myself touching it when a room feels like it's tilting. Jade took me to dinner and held up her glass and said, to being impossible to mislabel, and I loved her for knowing exactly what to toast. Vivian called months later to ask if I would speak at a charity evening she and my father were hosting for first responders and community preparedness. I've learned the difference between spectacle and gratitude, she said, and maybe she had. I told a ballroom full of people who never have to think about danger that training is unglamorous and essential, that safety is a culture and not a plan you print and forget, that the bravest thing some days is saying, I don't know, show me, and then learning. If you are hoping this ends with my father becoming a different person overnight, that's not how people work. What happened was smaller and, to me, more miraculous. The next time he introduced me to anyone, he said, "This is my daughter, Mara. She's with Sentinel and North. She's the one you call when the thing you didn't plan for shows up," and then he stopped talking and let me speak. I still stand at the back of rooms and notice the exits and the way a man's hand sits at his side and whether a server's shoes match the rest. I still do the math of danger under my breath. I've learned, finally, that my worth never lived in whether a room applauded when I walked in or whether a father beamed on cue. It lived in the steady pulse of doing what I'm built to do, even when no one is looking. It lived in the first breath a terrified woman took because I told her to, in the way the crowd calmed when someone's voice brought order to the chaos, in the fact that I will always, always step between. When I think about that weekend now, I don't hear the gunshot first. I hear the sound of glass breaking and how it made space in a room for honesty to walk in. I hear my name said without that careful, curdled smile. I feel the weight of a boundary set and kept. If you've ever been introduced as less than you are by someone who should have known better, I hope you recognize yourself somewhere in this. I hope the next time someone tries to fold you into a story you don't fit, you step out of their sentence and write your own. Drop a pin for me in the comments if you've ever had to prove the truth of yourself to someone who taught you to doubt it. Tell me how you did it, or tell me that you're trying. And if this reminded you that your path is yours even when it isn't applauded, hit the like button so the algorithm nudges it towards someone who needs it. Your worth isn't a headline. It's the quiet math of who you are when the room tips and you decide to be steady.